So much, Dr. Bodhi SR, and thank you, Lavanya and Biswaranjan. As a disclaimer, and as Bodhi also pointed out, that I'll be just reflecting on my thoughts and tribes, particularly stemming from the exam from the Manipur. And it's not necessary that I'm representing all the community or not, as I'm just reflecting as a part of exercise also for the Vision 2047. So echoing from this Professor Khaka, Professor Bodhi, and others, tribes in India, are people with distinct culture, history, tradition, identity, autonomy, sense of territory, boundaries, intrinsic relation with nature, land, water, forest, and varied mode of productions, political entity, and victims of these several waves of colonialisms. So tribes in Northeast India, as elsewhere in the country, are also experiencing multiple forms of colonialism and superimposed development. On the one hand, tribes were integrated within the nation state, but on the other hand, they are excluded from development paradigms. So tribes in India, in fact, epitomizes what indigenous people experience in other parts of the globe. They pay the price of state-led development projects, victims of this new liberal market-driven policy of growth, and prominently features at the bottoms of any standard development indicators. So the waves of this market forces and new liberal agenda has penetrated in every village, and hence it has altered the tribal reality to a great extent, and one doesn't really know where it is heading towards. So the socio-political-economic issues plaguing tribes are in fact too complex for the existing dominant development theories to adequately address the issue of situating as well as explaining the reality. Hence the imperative to approach from a different perspective and move beyond the state-centered approach to development of tribal society. One such approach could be a justice framework of development. So echoing from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's perspective, development with justice would mean equal access to all development facilities, irrespective of caste, tribes, creed, religion, gender, etc. So when certain social groups appropriate development and deny access to other social groups, which is in fact the order of the day, that is injustice. So fair and just distributions of materiality among various social categories in India and in Northeast in particular is one way forward to address the questions of development of injustice. Differential access to material resources or physical infrastructure based on social location and power dynamics, in fact, is the hallmark of Manipur state that germinate social exclusions. And to kind of little bit look from this Amartya Sen's perspective, for him, the central idea of justice is indeed the removal of all injustice in the society. The prevalence of injustice in India, in fact, can be found at all levels, ranging from poverty to structural inequality. In this domain, tribes or Adivasi face injustice at a much greater degree than other social groups in India. So tribes in Manipur and other northeastern states echo similar experiences where they bear the brunt of development of injustice. Hence, it is envisaged that the state's development approach incorporate this framework of development with justice by 2047, wherein tribes, like any other society, have their own agency of development that empower and take greater control of their territories. Tribes in Manipur or in Nagaland, as elsewhere in the country, in fact, are distinctly different from each other in respect of language, culture, tradition, custom, and so on and so forth. For instance, there are 34 communities that are enumerated as ST in Manipur. However, these communities can broadly be subsumed under two distinct social categories, the Naga and Zo. Zo comprises of the Kuki, Mezo, and Zomi. So tribes in Manipur, in fact, are at the edge of the state and economy. For decades, there has been an institutionalized mechanism of exclusion, discrimination, denial of agency to tribes in various forms. Despite being denied a fair deal by the Indian state, the dominant communities are in fact themselves guilty of practice against the tribes. In terms of, if you look in terms of people's representation to legislative assembly, there is a skewed representations. The ratio of the valley to hill members of Legislative Assembly in Manipur is 2:1. That is, Maitis have double the number of representatives in the assembly as compared to scheduled tribe, who hold a total of 26. For instance, the Sanapati district, with an area of 3,271 square kilometer and a population of above 3,54,972, has only 6 legislative constituency. In contrast, the Taubal district in the valley, with a total area of 514 square kilometer and a population of about 4,20,000, has 10 constituency. The difference in water population is only 65,000, but there is a difference of 4 assembly seats. Hence, the imperative of increasing the seats of ST to state legislative assembly in order to have some degree of political representation and have a fair playing field. So by 2047, this imbalance of representation could be corrected, wherein tribal seats at the assembly be increased by at least 40%. So in an ethnically polarized state like Manipur, in fact, the issues of land and autonomy, as also pointed out by Biswaranjan and Lavina, also came about the issue of land, are the key features of contestations and contradictions. The gravity of this problem can be gauged from the fact that there are several distinct lines of discourse and articulations by varied communities in the state. The fight for this ethnospace, be it the valley dwellers majority or the tribes on the hills, continues unabated in different forms and strategy. Yet the hill-valley divide is visible in these ethno-special assertions. The political demands of the tribe, on the other hand, can be coached into 2 different discourses, that of the Nagas and the Zos. Here, my concern is that tribal political articulation be given a space to grow organically and recognized by the state. And if we come back to the aspects of the development, one will look at the trajectory of development in Manipur, in fact, echoes a clear picture whereby those who hold power also control development activities and projects. This concentration of decision-making power in the hands of the few individuals and by the dominant community results in the exclusion of those communities that actually require development. Development, in fact, does become a political question, necessitating a political situations. But if we look at the development approach of the state, particularly in tribal areas, it's caught in a dichotomy. The state neither follow nor respect the existing tribal institution and governance, nor does it pay heed to constitutional provisions. The situation, combined with a state apathy towards the development of tribal areas, further widen the development gap between the tribals and non-tribal areas and foster deep hostility, deepening the contestation of varied ethnic communities. So when one articulates the concepts like, for instance, democratic deficits in the context of Manipur, it actually means that there is no democracy. The tribal people are not being heard. They are treated as second-class citizens. Their lives are less important than the lives of Maitis in Manipur. So in this context, tribals feel that they are misfit in the state and begins to question, is this our state? Can the state really accommodate us and give us equal treatment? So if we look for the experience of those in Churchampur in particular and across the state in general, they felt neglected as a result of more and more recent events. The Nagas in Manipur have experienced such feelings for over 60 years, as they've never felt part of the state at all. Hence, tribal society have been asserting their political rights to a peaceful coexistence in the forms of either a separate state or total autonomy from that of the dominant community. This needs to seriously engage, and rights of the tribal political assertion are recognized by 2047. And the peaceful coexistence prevail between tribes and non-tribals with distinct governance structure. Again, in fact, it's imperative to also reflect within tribes. There are also dominant forces wherein tribes whose populations are in fact numerically larger than others tends to dominate other tribes. This is also true in terms of the, if you look about the rich and the poor within the village. The waves of this monetary economy, along with these market forces and corruption, have altered the perceptions of local on the very notions of development. This change is based, in fact, encapsulated on the conception of development between the rich and the poor. It is, in fact, an undeniable fact that in any society, the poor are numerically large. Development for the rich means an increase in, private income, material accumulations, and high living standard, among others. Development is thus conceived as a materialistic term, and it can be argued that development is not taking place. So for the elites, the indigenous systems of governance, traditions, customary laws, etc., is seen as the hurdles for development. In contrast, development for the poor means collectivity, where community comes from and decisions are made collectively for or on what is based for their society. Yet their voices are superseded by the rich and sidelines from decisions making. So the primacy change in the development agenda is now based on social differentiations and stratification rather than collective growth, where every individual has a say in the village development. For instance, in Manipur, the state is well aware of the hill-valley divide in all spheres of development and widening gap between the rich and poor. Yet, the state and its agents are consciously looking for the elites in the society to penetrate their agenda and maintain status quo. A case in points, in fact, awarding of contract and government schemes by ministers and MLAs in their constituency. Well, I don't have to really go in detail these aspects. But here I would like to come to some critical interventions as envisaged by 2047 that includes increasing the ST seats in Manipur Legislative Assembly, recognitions of tribal political assertions for self-governance, implementations of constitutional provision in letter and spirit. For instance, Article 371C of the Indian Constitution provides a special provision for the legislation and the administration of the hill areas of Manipur in the forms of hill area committee. So in exercise of the power conferred by this Article 371C, the President, VP Giri, in fact, passed an order known as Manipur Legislative Assembly Hill Areas Committee Order in 1972. These need to critically implement in letter and spirit. For instance, the Hill Area Committee in 2021 drafted an autonomous district council bill, but it was not tabled in the Legislative Assembly. This was, in fact, aborted and thwarted by the dominant community's representative in the Assembly. So the interventions of the governors, presidents, and the union government in this kind of issue is critical for the empowerment of tribal communities in Manipur. And in terms of my favorite aspects when it comes to the infrastructure, and here I would like to reflect a bit in terms of the connectivity infrastructure, the imperatives of building, what's called these elevated highways in all the hilly terrain, wherein it connects to every villages with resilient infrastructure. Besides the need of upgrading the existing tribal research institute, the state should also establish, tribal central university as a university of eminence with dedicated research on tribal studies. And in terms of local governance, each village chairman, secretary, or each village council be recognized by the state as a unit for governance. And of course, they should also be given a monthly salary. So the current autonomous district council also needed to be upgraded to the status of the 6th schedule. I think with this, I'll stop and look forward to the discussions.